I will say some of the most transformative practices for me have been one, the practice of mindfulness. Part of my midlife crisis when I turned 40 was I decided, because I wanted to discover this difference between achievement and fulfillment, I decided to go off to an ashram in India and learn how to meditate. And it was kind of the longest vacation that I had ever taken from my corporate life. It was 20 days of vacation all at once. And it was some of the most peaceful and poignant moments of my life up to that point, where I really learned how to connect more with myself and with a source of power and wisdom that is inside each of us. And that was powerful and pivotal. And it really actually gave me the courage and the clarity to decide to leave my corporate job 4 years later. I actually now have a course on LinkedIn Learning that's been taken by, it looks like, 425,000 people, which is Mindfulness Practices.
Hello, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. This is Nishant, and welcome to the Nishant Garg Show. I am on a mission to help you live mindful days, and my job on this show is to invite the world-class experts to extract the practices, routines, and habits to help you live a fulfilled and abundant life. Today's guest is Henna Inam. Henna is the CEO of Transformational Leadership Inc., C-level executive coach, independent board director, and author of the book Wired for Disruption. A 20-year veteran of Fortune 500 companies, she has seen firsthand the pressures of leading in times of disruption. Her book details the 5 shifts in agility and 15 agility accelerators, tools and practices to help activate our inner agility and be a force for good in times of disruption. Henna is a leadership blogger for Forbes and a global speaker. She has appeared on Fox Business, NPR, and is quoted in Fortune, CNN. Henna received her MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and completed executive education programs at the Harvard Business School. You can say hello to Henna on Twitter at Henna Inam, HENNAINM. And without further ado, please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Henna. Henna, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It is my pleasure as well. When I was reading about you, I was so fascinated about your profile. I was getting ding in my nerves and I was so excited that if you could start with your personal story, where did you grow and what was your childhood like?
Yeah, so happy to do that, Nishant. So I'm originally from Pakistan. I was born there in Karachi, grew up there until the age of 11. And then between the age of 11 and 19, my dad, who was working for an American oil company, he got posted to their international rotations. And so we moved to Tanzania, Dar es Salaam. I learned how to speak Swahili. Then we moved to the Philippines, then Thailand, and I did my first 2 years of college in Thailand. And then we landed in Texas, which I know that's where you are. So I actually went to school at the University of Texas at Austin. And then after that, went off to grad school at Wharton, and then 20 years in corporate America, early midlife crisis at the ripe old age of 40, and started to think about what is it that I really want to do when I grow up. And, left my corporate role at the age of 44. And this is now 10 years ago, and started my company. It's called Transformational Leadership. And my work is to work with C-level leaders of mission-focused companies to help them grow into their potential to be transformational leaders.
There are so many things that I would love to cover in our brief conversation. So you moved from one place to another due to your dad's job when you were in your teenage years. So what did you learn from being in different cultures and learning different languages?
Yeah, so I really loved the adventure of it. I consider myself quite an adventurous person. Everything, I kind of tend to frame everything as an adventure, right? And so the adventure of moving from one country to the other, going to new schools, learning a new language was quite interesting and stimulating and exciting. I mean, I remember in high school when I was in the Philippines, we were studying world history and World War II, right? And it was at an American school. And two of my best friends, one was German and the other one's Japanese. And, imagine being in a classroom where you have people from all different countries and you're talking about World War II and you have lots of different perspectives, right? And it was really, to me, it was really, I think it stimulated my curiosity. It stimulated my ability to see lots of different perspectives. And I'm so deeply interested in cultures, all kinds of different cultures and learning. And I've traveled so much in my life, not recently, of course, because of the pandemic, but I think it's really created this part of me that is very adaptive, right? And very curious and very open to learning about new and different things and seeing other perspectives.
What was your self-talk when you were studying with students from different cultures and backgrounds?
I don't know if I recall what my self-talk was. I think what's interesting, and I don't know if this is kind of where you want to go, but to me, one of the things I realized growing up, and this was sort of, this goes back to my midlife crisis, right? One of the things I realized is that I was so adaptive, right, growing up, that there was a part of me that didn't know really who I was. Mm-hmm. That, the reason I wrote my book, Wired for Authenticity, is because I really had struggled, even in my corporate career, right? So post my travels and, I worked in corporate America first for Procter & Gamble, then for Novartis. And all along, I was an Asian woman, mostly in meetings with white men. As I grew up, up through the organization, I was in various C-level roles and that I was always adapting, right? And it was sort of the same thing as in my childhood growing up. I was always adapting. And until I hit my midlife crisis and I thought about, this has been a really great adventure, but who am I? And what's really important to me? Because I'm always adapting to do well, growing up from our cultures, right? You recognize that you're always trying to achieve. I grew up with parents that were very, very, like many, Indian and Pakistani parents. I grew up with parents that were quite demanding. So, and that continued, right? So that you somehow internalize that achievement drive. And that happened in my corporate career too. I was always sort of, okay, what's the next assignment? What's the next rung in the corporate ladder? And ironically, right around when I turned 40, I was one of 10 people in a company of 90,000. Our CEO every year picked 10 people for outstanding awards. And so my team and I that year, we were out of Mexico and running our business in Mexico. And we were recognized, I was recognized for that award. And I remember flying from Basel, Switzerland to Mexico City. It's a long flight, 35,000 feet, thinking I should really be happy. And, I'm happy, but like there's something missing. And that was the journey that was that was sort of the start of the midlife crisis. And, who am I? What do I want? What's really important? The difference between achievement and fulfillment and exploration of those topics.
I can definitely relate to this because at one point in my life, I was constantly seeking achievements, external validation and achievement, and eventually I found that deep void internally. So there is this balance between achieving things and finding that inner balance. So Henna, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self from now?
Yeah. So, what's really interesting is that, life takes us on these twists and turns, right?
Hmm.
And I think that all of the experiences that I had, and I believe all of the experiences that we all have, are just stepping stones to whatever it is that we're going to do next, whatever it is that is part of, our character, building of our learnings. I think what I'm learning is that we just have to be present for all of our experiences. I don't know if I would change anything specifically, because all of those years of achievement and all the experiences, even some of the challenging experiences that I had, I think have been stepping stones for me. So the work that I'm doing, the fact that I worked really hard to achieve, right, was a stepping stone to what I'm doing now, is which really fulfills me. I work with C-level leaders in these large organizations that have incredible access to resources and groups of people that have a tremendous impact on people and planet. And our ability to work together and help them connect with the deepest parts of themselves, to connect with inner purpose, to connect with what others in the organization, to connect with, what's really important and how to drive positive change inside and outside their organizations and their ecosystem. I don't think I would have the credibility to work with them, right? Because if I didn't have had all of those experiences that I had, and if I hadn't worked hard, and if I hadn't been, such a high achiever, right? So I think all of these things, if you look back, and I think there's this wonderful, Steve Jobs has this wonderful speech that he does that's on YouTube, right? That he talks about, you can only connect the dots looking back. And I think that's what it has been for a little bit, as I look back at my life, it's been all these dots that are connecting, and it will continue to connect. This conversation even, right?
Yeah.
All of our experiences are wonderful, wonderful building blocks to whatever's coming next.
Hannah, you talk about being adaptive a lot in your work and in your book. So, what practices could you suggest to our listeners to be more adaptive to new environments, to what is happening in this world these days?
Yeah, so my latest book, Nishant, is called Wired for Disruption. And it's about the 5 shifts in agility to lead in the future of work. And I had a really interesting experience. We were talking about experiences, right? So I was at
Yes.
the World Economic Forum in Davos this year, and I walked into a virtual reality experience. And in this virtual reality experience, I was intrigued by it because I was going to feel what it's like to be a tree, right? So they hand you walk in this little room, and they hand you a little packet of seeds, and now you're a tree, right? So you put your virtual reality headset on, there's like a little backpack, and we're going through this experience. And pretty soon as I put my headset on, I noticed that like I'm a little tiny shoot, a tree, and there's a big ant to the left of me, and I'm kind of coming out and I realize I'm in the rainforest. And like, it's amazing how virtual reality works. I actually experience myself growing, like growing taller as a tree. And then I feel a tug on my right arm, and I've just noticed that it's a tree branch, and there's a big, beautiful parrot that's landed on the tree branch. And then I'm growing, and then there is a night sky, which is absolutely beautiful. It reminded me of my time in Tibet when we were hiking up to base camp at Everest, and this beautiful canopy of stars that I'm to this moment today, I'm sort of in goosebumps as I remember that night sky, because it's full of this canopy of stars, and I'm just so present and so inspired by this moment. And then morning comes, and I hear some sounds in the distance, and then I see fire, and the forest floor is being burned down. And I feel heat. I feel heat. I see the creatures in the rainforest scurrying for their lives. And I literally walked out of that experience with tears in my eyes. And I thought, what are we doing? What are we humans doing to our planet? This is our home. And, like, I'm even having some emotion right now as I'm talking about it. And I thought, we have a limited amount of time. We have 10 years. And this is a remarkable time for humanity to come together, because no one person can do this on their own. It's our collective home. We need to, as human beings, learn how to collectively work toward the purposes that really inspire us, find our wisest and most inspired selves, the strengths that we've accumulated and the qualities of character, and bring them to this moment, because this moment matters. And so I decided to, when the pandemic happened, decided to write a book. It's called Wired for Disruption. And really what I thought about is, where can I impact? What impact can I have? Because my goal was, I want to impact 1 million leaders to be a force for good in this decade of disruption. And how can I do that? That's what the book is about. It's about these 5 shifts in agility. There's a free quiz that anybody can take on my website, and I'll share you can put it in the show notes.
Yes.
But yeah, it's to come back to, after a very long story, come back to your question. I think that the advice I would have is for people to dig deep inside, to find their deepest inspirations, to find their most brilliant strengths, and to find a need that calls to them. There are so many needs right now, whether it's a need to help people become the best versions of themselves, the people that you lead, or whether it's a need to find innovative solutions because you are a brilliant thinker and scientist, or whether it's a need to, create something new in terms of experiences for people. That virtual reality experience was so powerful, and somebody had the inspiration, and it impacted me. So I think we're all so interestingly connected, and our job is to find that fire that's inside of us, that ignites us, so that we can step into the most powerful and inspired selves that we can be.
And in your book, you talk about 5 shifts in agility. Could you talk about 1 or 2 in brief?
Yeah. So the 2 shifts, so the 5, let me kind of tell you what the 5 shifts are. The first is neuro-emotional agility. That's managing our own neurobiology. The second is learning agility, and that's our ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn in an environment that is very disruptive and unpredictable. The third is trust agility, and that's about how we create trust across ecosystems, so that teams of people that are coming together to solve for these issues inside and outside of organizations. As we move toward more gig work, how do you create trust and safety on teams and with the people that you're working with, so you can move things along much faster and better and more innovatively? And there's a lot of research around trust agility in terms of, any disruption creates a 45% change in the experience of somebody. And that once, teams that have trust are 9 times more agile, right? So how do you do that? The fourth is stakeholder agility. And that's, a lot of the problems that we're solving for now collectively, whether it's finding a solution for the pandemic, for the virus, or a solution to returning to economic growth, or solutions related to AI and climate change. All these big collective issues require us to collaborate with people throughout an ecosystem, and that's stakeholder agility. How do I work with and see my entire ecosystem? And then the fifth is growth agility, and that's all about how do I grow myself and the people around me, so that we can collectively handle and become much more agile to the situation that we're dealing with.
You mentioned about AI. By the way, AI is artificial intelligence. People who may not know about AI.
Yes.
So, Henna, what practices do you have in your personal life to grow yourself?
So I will say some of the most transformative practices for me have been one, the practice of mindfulness. Part of my midlife crisis when I turned 40 was I decided, because I wanted to discover this difference between achievement and fulfillment, I decided to go off to an ashram in India and learn how to meditate. And it was kind of the longest vacation that I had ever taken from my corporate life. It was 20 days of vacation all at once. And it was some of the most peaceful and poignant moments of my life up to that point, where I really learned how to connect more with myself and with a source of power and wisdom that is inside each of us. And that was powerful and pivotal. And it really actually gave me the courage and the clarity to decide to leave my corporate job, 4 years later. And so that's one key practice. I actually now have a course on LinkedIn Learning that's been taken by, it looks like 425,000 people, which is Mindfulness Practices. So anybody who's listening to this can check out that course. It's got specifically mindfulness practices for challenging times in terms of how do you deal with chaos and ambiguity? How do you learn how to recenter yourself? Because our bodies and brains are designed such that, in times of disruption, we fall into this fight, flight, and freeze mode. And we have the capacity to shift ourselves. That's actually neuro-emotional agility that I talk about in the book. So that mindfulness practice has been a phenomenal practice. The other practice that I've just now, I've kind of has been wobbly for me. I kind of go to it and then, fall off the bandwagon and then go back and then fall off. But it's been really, for the times that I've stuck to it, has been really, really amazing, is a daily questions practice. And this was something that has been written about and talked about by Marshall Goldsmith, who is a leading, CEO coach. And the daily questions practice is one where we decide here are, anywhere from 5 to 10 questions that we pick for ourselves, that we hold ourselves accountable to every day. So I have an Excel spreadsheet and it has my list I have 10 questions on my list, and I have an accountability partner. We call each other at 7 a.m. every day, and she's got her list, and we basically say, how do I rate myself? And I'll tell you, it's a wonderful mechanism if you want to get accountability to the things that really matter to you. It's a wonderful mechanism to hold yourself accountable.
I would love to ask you so many things around this topic.
Sure.
So you have that list of questions in the Excel sheet. So do you write those questions every day, or they are same throughout?
They're the same questions. Over time, they may change and shift as as new things emerge, but most of them, they're mostly all the same questions.
So do you have to answer those questions, or do you just have to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5?
It's a rating on a scale of 1 to 10. So do you want to hear what my questions are?
Please, I would love that.
All right. So my first question is, did I exercise today? Either walk 10,000 steps or work out for at least a half hour. And I rate myself from 0 to 10. Like, did I do it or did I not do it? And 10 is, yes, I did it. My second question, and I've been in a recent self-care, I think self-care is sort of the key component. Our energy, maintaining our own energy, is such an important part of any impact that we're going to have externally, right? So my second question is, did I drink 64 ounces of water? My third question is, did I make healthy food choices? And for me, it's protein and veggies and anti-inflammatory foods. The fourth is, did I eat mindfully with appreciative attention? The fifth is, did I meditate and connect with my wisest self for 15 minutes today? The sixth is, did I journal the three things that I'm grateful for? The seventh thing is, did I write my top 3 priorities and progress them for the day? The eighth is, did I do my best to practice courage today in situations that called for it? Number 9 is, did I appreciate the good in others? And number 10, did I take my daily vitamins, supplements, and apple cider vinegar?
That is so amazing. I love it. And as part of the mindfulness practice, this can be called as journaling practice. We can journal on these questions. We can make it more expansive.
Mm, yeah, we could certainly do that. I think if you're looking for a journaling practice, I have a blog post that I wrote for Forbes, which is called the 10 Questions for Your Leadership Journal. And those could actually be powerful for your audience as well. So you might want to, if that's something that interests you or would interest your audience, that would be something to go look up on Forbes.
And Henna, what's your meditation practice look like these days?
Well, now that I have these accountability practices, looking a lot better. Let me just tell you that. Yeah, so it's 15 minutes every day, and I do it, early in the morning, and I have a routine that I stick with where I do my daily questions at 7 a.m., then I work out, then I sit and meditate, and then I'm ready to start my day. And so, so my meditation practice is really like just getting quiet, and it's getting present with myself. It's, sometimes I start with getting gratitude, just, taking a few deep breaths and warming the heart with gratitude and steadying the mind. And and then I just sit and I'm quiet. And whenever my mind goes off, to somewhere else, like the to-do list for the day, I bring it back. And and sometimes as I connect with myself, I discover that there are, difficult emotions. If there is anger or sadness or anxiety or something, I just pay attention to the emotion. Don't reject it. Just pay attention to it. See if it has a lesson for me. And one of the really pivotal practices that I talk about in my book, Wired for Disruption, is the practice of self-compassion. And a lot has been written and researched on that practice. Dr. Kristen Neff, who is a phenomenal researcher. In fact, I had her on my podcast, has talked a lot about the benefits of self-compassion and how it not only helps us be resilient and actually shifts us from fight, flight, or difficult emotions to a much more curious and open state, but that it also helps us extend compassion for others, which, in the world that we're living in today, it's so important for us not just to have compassion for ourselves, but to extend compassion for others, as so many of us are dealing with so much anxiety and mental health issues.
Henna, do you remember any instance from your life or any challenging instance from your life when becoming compassionate towards yourself was not easy for you?
Well, I will tell you that a lot in my early years, my practice of self-compassion is rather recent. It's rather recent. I would say since my mindfulness practice, I guess, is when I started. But early on in my career, at one point in my career, I actually got fired from a job. And not fired from the company, but essentially there was a new CEO. They wanted to bring in their own person and asked me to move into a different role. And it was it was a really, really hard time when I started to really question. I had had a really high flying career, always high achiever and all that. And it really rattled my sense of self-confidence, and it really rattled my sense of believing in myself. And I didn't at that point have a self-compassion practice. And it was really hard to overcome that loss of confidence when that happened. And I didn't really have a great support system around me either, because I was so ashamed, right? I was really so ashamed. I really didn't have the sense of vulnerability or confidence in myself to even open up to people about that experience. And so Yeah, I think that's one regret. Like, I think I would have really liked to have had my self-compassion practice at that time. But on the other hand, it reminds me that any setbacks now are so much easier to navigate. And we will all have setbacks, right? That's kind of part of life. And it allows us to take more risks when we know that we have a very powerful practice to fall back on.
Yes, I found one blog which was written by you a long time ago on self-limiting loop.
Mm.
So would you say that when we don't have enough self-confidence, when we feel ashamed, when we feel not vulnerable, we get into self-limiting loop?
It's been a while probably since I wrote it, but I think it's one of the tools that I write about in the book is called the Mind Story Map. And it's a map that anybody can use that allows them to notice the perspective that they're standing in right now. So, on the Mind Story Map, it's like it starts to see, what is the story that I'm telling myself right now? And the story could be, for example, in the case of me getting fired, is, I'm really incompetent, right? Or I don't know what happened. So you're either blaming yourself, right? Or you're blaming the other person. My CEO has absolutely no clue, and this is a wrong decision, and, all kinds of expletives, right? Related to the other person. So you get into this blame mode, right? And so the Mind Story Map, what it allows you to do is it allows you to sort of see the perspective that you're standing in, your belief about yourself, your belief about others, the emotions it creates, the behaviors that those emotions generate, and then the outcomes that are as a result of this. And, any outcome then reinforces itself, right? The way that our brains are designed, our stories reinforce themselves. And that's why we get into habitual patterns. And so the idea of, how do you use this tool to get yourself out of that self-limiting loop, this loop of stories that you're telling yourself? You start to notice the story and then step out of it. And then you say, what other choices do I have? What other choices do I have? What I can offer myself self-compassion. And I can just notice, that this is a really difficult moment for me. And difficult moments are part of being human. And can I just be kind to myself? That's the beautiful self-compassion mantra that Kristen Neff talks about.
Yeah, she is wonderful. Do you suggest mindfulness practices and meditation to corporate leaders?
Yes. In fact, the mindfulness practices course that's on LinkedIn Learning is actually all work related. Those are a lot of work-related practices. Of course, you're one person. So as you recreate new neural pathways in your brain with mindfulness for practices at work, you're also using some of those practices of stepping back, seeing the big picture, looking at your assumptions, managing your own emotions. As you do that at work and then you do that at home, it actually helps you become much more resilient leader of yourself and others.
Would that help in expanding our self-awareness as well?
Absolutely. Of course. As you become more present to what's happening within you in the present moment, and you use this tool that's in my book, the Mind Story Map, then you can use this. My coaching clients, it's like they get so much in the habit of using the Mind Story Map, they start to notice the habitual thinking patterns that they have. And then it's like this pothole, right, that you keep falling into, like you keep stepping into the same pothole. And then as you become mindful, you notice the pothole more. And maybe the next time you're noticing the pothole in slow motion that you're walking into. And then the next time, maybe you're just avoiding the pothole and you're sidestepping it. And that's how growth works, right? You start.
Yeah. What is whole body leadership? I learned about this practice from your work. What is that? If you could explain to our listeners?
Yeah, whole body leadership is really about being connected with your body. So many of us are in our mind all the time, right? Like we got a to-do list. We're going from one thing to the other, to the other, to the other, and we're hardly here. And even like when we're in conversation with somebody, in our heads, we're already preparing an answer to what somebody, is saying or how we're going to rebut them. We're not really listening to them with our whole bodies and listening to their whole bodies. Like, what is the emotion that they're feeling? What is we have mirror neurons, right, in our brains. Mm-hmm. Mirror neurons, the way that they work is we feel and are impacted by other people's emotions. And so, and empathy in this time is so important. And so being able to slow down, get out of our heads and be in a conversation with our entire bodies, it's like a slow motion experience of awareness where you're aware of what's happening inside of you. You're aware of what's happening inside of the other person in terms of, what are the emotions that they're feeling? What are they feeling but not saying? And it allows you to be a lot more empathetic and curious and a lot wiser in terms of your own reactions and step out of the patterns that we normally get ourselves into.
So I would love to ask you something about your experience in the ashram. Yeah. Which ashram was that?
Yeah, it was called Oneness University. And this was now 14 years ago, like that, I think. Oneness University, and it was somewhere outside of Chennai. It's about, I think, an hour and a half outside of Chennai. And it was a small class. It was people from all over the world, and there were like 10 of us. It was a very simple place. We each had a room. I actually went with a good friend of mine. We both went together, and we would get up early in the morning at 6 a.m., meditate for an hour, and then eat breakfast. Breakfast was all vegetarian, really well, cooked food from people that had been meditating. So it tasted good. And we had been meditating. So we were so present to the tastes and flavors of the food. And there would be various lectures during the day and then times for meditations. And we were just encouraged to clean up our diet and also to spend a lot of time in reflection. I was fondly called the 2 toilet roll lady because I would always be carrying 2 toilet rolls of paper because I would cry a lot. As you're releasing all of these things, you just, you let your body do what it needs to do. And so it was probably some of my most peaceful times up to then. And I had told my team at the time to please not disturb me because I was going to be in silence a lot and wasn't going to be checking my devices, etc. Just only email me if there is a crisis. And they were fantastic about it. And so what was really interesting is that, toward the mid to end of that experience, it was so interesting that, when one of my direct reports emailed me and I was, emailing him back with something really short and I wanted to say, love Henna. And I thought, look, I've completely lost my mind. But that was the emotion. It was this, this is how peaceful it was. So
I can relate to that, and it happens with me if I'm writing any professional email to somebody.
Yeah.
Instead of writing thanks, I may write with gratitude, love, peace, and it is okay. It is okay.
It's okay. I think more and more we just need to make space for all of that in our workplaces. I think we've come to work for so long without our souls and left our souls at the door. And I think what the world and our workplaces require of us as leaders now is to bring our souls and bring the best and wisest parts of ourselves and the most loving parts of ourselves and the most purposeful parts of ourselves. Because I think that's what humans need more and more from each other, particularly in these times.
Yes. And Henna, what did you learn in ashram that you didn't learn in business school about being an entrepreneur?
Oh, that's such a good question. What did I learn? Such a good question. I learned about my humanity. I learned that I can be fragile and to deal with my fragility in a really compassionate way. I learned that I can be both fragile and strong. Like, so much of our corporate lives, business school, it's all about being strong, and we forget that we as humans have these incredibly beautiful and fragile parts of ourselves that need to be taken care of with tremendous care of ourselves and of others. And I think so many of us sort of lose that human part of ourselves or leave it at the door when we come to our workplaces. And yeah, I think I learned how to have a much more forgiving, compassionate, and loving relationship with myself.
What would you like to change, if any, one thing at the workplace?
I think our workplaces need us to connect deeply with our inner purposes, with the wisest parts of ourselves, the most inspired parts of ourselves. And when our actions and behaviors come from that place, I think we will be able to solve for all of these collective challenges that we're faced with.
I would like to speak from myself, from my experience in the corporate in the past, that people are never told what is their purpose. They are just given a job, they are just given a task to do. They're never told why, what is the why behind their task. And there is a study, the difference between purpose and passion. If somebody has a purpose, the passion comes naturally. If somebody has a passion, but there is a lack of purpose, you may not go above and beyond. You need to have some sort of purpose and meaning in your work, that sense of satisfaction to thrive. Otherwise, it just becomes finding things in the outer world and losing that inner self, that inner wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a powerful thought, Nishant. And I think more and more, it's so relevant for this decade of disruption that we're in, because more and more, many of us are going to be working in gig-like situations, whether we're working inside of an organization or have a portfolio of careers, so it's not like one career path. We're going to have a portfolio of gigs, many of us, where we have different projects that we're working on. And as we look at the future of work, where jobs are a lot of jobs will go away as a result of artificial intelligence, and a lot of new jobs will get created. And in order for us to be truly adaptive to all of this, we need, in the past, we were guided by these organization structures that were fairly rigid. Now, I think we need to be guided with our inner voices, that inner sense of purpose that really drives us. Because imagine what it would be like. Like my vision for our world is that we each find that thing that deeply inspires us, that purpose, our strengths, and we bring it to the work that we're doing. So many of us are so disappointed in terms of, I'll work from 9 to 5. These days it's 9 to 9 melds, and I'll find my purpose elsewhere. And I don't think that that's at all doable anymore. I want the people who are most inspired by growing young minds to be teachers. I don't want them to do it just for the paycheck. I want the people who are most interested in, serving our planet to be the scientists who will come up with the latest innovations that will help reverse this climate disaster that we're in right now. Yeah. I mean, I feel so grateful and privileged to be working in an area that feels so purposeful to me. The ability to help people connect deeply with the things that really matter to them so they can be a force of positive change inside of their organizations.
Finding or seeking purpose is challenging for a lot of people, and I struggled with that in the past. Is there any practice or any book could you suggest for tapping into that wisdom?
Yeah, well, I'll shamelessly promote my two books. The first book is Wired for Authenticity, and it's now available in Audible. And it is really about connecting with yourself. It's figuring out, here's 7 practices to be an authentic and agile leader, and part of it deals with purpose. The other book actually also, and in fact, the podcast has a purpose podcast. One of the episodes for the Transformational Leadership podcast is actually a mindfulness exercise that helps you connect with your own purpose. So those be a couple of resources that I think are out there. There's a lot of other things. Your purpose is something that evolves over time. And what I would do is to look and pay attention to when you're working on something that, regardless of the outcome of, whether you succeed or fail, that just working on it gives you a lot of energy, a lot of positive energy. And if you find some of those things, then that's connected to your purpose.
What are some of the books that have inspired you in your life or you have gifted the most?
Wow. I don't think I've gifted enough books. I've gifted a lot of my own books. I don't think I've gifted
Other books.
Those books, but I'll tell you a couple of books that are fantastic that I keep on my bookshelf. One is Kristen Neff's book on self-compassion that I think I've recommended it a lot because I think it is so useful for today's times. And that's, if I had to pick one book that is most relevant for today's time, I would say her book on self-compassion could be a real anchor for us.
One more book?
So the other book that, for those people who are interested in adaptive leadership, there's a book called The Practice of Adaptive Leadership that I have here, and it's by Heifetz from Harvard. And I think that's also another book. A third that it kind of calls to my spiritual self is Eckhart Tolle. He's a really powerful, spiritual teacher. And I really have appreciated his book. It's called A New Earth. And I read it a long, long, long time ago, but the wisdom of it continues to resonate for me.
Great. Thank you for that. So, Henna, before I ask you my last question, I would love to ask you, what are you grateful for these days?
Wow, there's so much I'm grateful for. I think I many times a week, I do a walk in a nature preserve that is about 5 minutes from my house. And I'm really grateful for those nature walks. There's a lake, and often there are many beautiful birds that I get to see and lots of gorgeous trees in this nature preserve, and lots of turtles sitting on tree branches right at the lake, and some deer that I get to see. And it just really feeds my soul to be able to do these nature walks. It gives me perspective and joy every day. And it really helps me be centered, which is what is probably the most important thing, I think, for all of us, for each of us to find the thing that really renews them and gives them the positive energy that we all need to navigate these times.
And last but not the least, where can our listeners find you online, and where can they find you on the Forbes?
Yeah, so they can just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm an open connector. Just send me a note saying that you heard me on this podcast. Happy to connect with you. They can find me on my website, www.transformleaders.tv, and listen in to the podcast. It's the Transformational Leadership Podcast with Henna Inam. And yeah, I think that's good enough. You'll probably find me.
Thank you so much, Henna. It was very authentic and vulnerable conversation with you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode today. If you did enjoy this, please subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcast, or you can visit https://nishantgarg.me, NISHANTGARG.me. You can also share this episode with your loved ones to help them live a fulfilled life. You are not alone in this journey. We all struggle in life. There is no shame in talking about it. I go through my highs and lows. I get depressed, and these practices help me in living a resilient life. You can also do this. You got this. Don't judge yourself. You are doing the best you can. And thank you so much again.